Yeah, and I will remind you that as you are listening to this teaching, to not be lost in the speaker or to be checked out thinking about problems at work or at home, but to bring yourself back to being aware. It's here and now. That's it. The past is gone. Future is not real. And to keep observing, noticing without trying to change. It's okay, you hear this stuff and the mind will associate. That's good. It's part of understanding, but stay here with us. All right, so the core idea in the beginning of this fourth way system, and we call it a system for, easier to communicate, is that unlike other species on this planet, that the creator or nature or God brings them to full completion, full potentiality, like a tiger or elephant or alligator. It appears that these other species, they are brought to full maximum potential. So when you see a little tiger is like the full-on tiger. There's nowhere to go. It cannot evolve or something. They are fully formed, complete already by itself. Unlike all the other creatures, the human being animal species is not. Nature or God brings us to some level of adulthood with the body and some type of level of functioning. But from the point of view of consciousness, we are far from finished. So from the point of view of evolution of consciousness and consciousness potential, as humans, we are in a half-formed state. And here we have some type of free choice to some degree, some free will. There's the option to remain as we are and just live a mechanical existence, unconscious, and we will see later, asleep from the point of view of potential of awakening and consciousness. So we can live a life like that and remain as we are, but very likely devolve, or we evolve. We kind of start to develop from the point of view of consciousness, but that doesn't happen by itself. Doesn't happen. It's not automatic. So in order to continue to evolve and reach our full potential from the point of view of consciousness, and this full potential is connected to, we'll speak later what it is connected to. So in order to reach this full potential, we need to make conscious effort. We need to work on ourselves for prolonged periods of time in a sustained way for many years with some good teaching. And then, so that's the core idea. One obstacle to this process of evolution for humans is that we imagine that we are already conscious, we are already awake, we are already the maximum of what we can be. So one obstacle to becoming more awake and more conscious is that we already imagine we have that. Whereas from the point of view of the system, we are in a kind of almost like zombie state, half asleep, and the so-called waking state that everybody lives in, we all live in, and where we go to work and raise families and kill people, make wars, and all of that, this state of consciousness, write books and inventions, poetry and atrocities. All of these are happening in the so-called waking state, which is it's actually, as compared to what's possible, it's like actually quite asleep. So the idea is that, and this is a hard pill to swallow, but that's the beginning of this fourth way, is actually as we are asleep. And however, there is the possibility of becoming more awake. But in order to become more awake, we need to actually be open to the possibility that we are asleep, and then actually to verify, to actually quite advanced stage on the path is to realize how asleep we are, basically. And there's this metaphor that appears in different traditions, allegory of the cave, and this allegory that Gurdjieff talks about, of the allegory of the prison, that humanity as it is and as we are, it's like we are in a prison. And it's a maximum security prison in a way. The ultimate maximum security prison is that the prisoners are not aware that they are in prison. It's a little bit like the Matrix metaphor. The prisoners are in a jar of where their energy is sucked and used for no benefit for oneself, and they are dreaming that they are somebody when actually they are asleep. So that's the allegory on the fourth way. I will pass it on to you, Peter, to touch on this idea some more.
One of the principal ideas the fourth way presents, this fourth way system presents, about what it means that we're asleep and what it means that we can wake up. And this is, everything revolves around this idea, this central idea that we can be more conscious more often, we can be more awake. But to understand that, we have to see what it means that we are not. And so the fourth way presents the idea that there are 4 states of consciousness. And Mihai mentioned the waking state. That's what's happening right now. We walk, we talk, we make decisions, we live our lives. We have fears, we have emotions, we have desires. All of these things characteristic of being a human being. And while this is going on, though, we forget about, sounds strange at first, but we forget about our existence. We forget that we actually exist on a planet, that we are in a body, and that we are even in a room. We lose sight of the fact of where we are, and what we're doing. We are instead just there doing what we are doing, and we get lost in our activities. We get lost in our thoughts. We get lost in our feelings. This is what's called the second state of consciousness. And there's a feeling of I, of me, in this condition. And we mistake that as consciousness. And we'll get into more what that means, why this mistake is made so frequently. In addition to the second state, though, there's something called the first state of consciousness. And already you can see how simple the fourth way terminology is. In Hinduism, Buddhism, Tibetan teachings, they use different terms for this, but it's simple in the fourth way. It's very mathematical and technical. There's a second state. The first state is below the second state. And the first state corresponds to what you would think of as when you're asleep at night. And you actually have no realization of where you are. And you're either lost in dreams, dreaming, and you're in your dreams. Consciousness is now in the dreams. And or it's completely absent. You're in what's called a state of deep rest, deep sleep. It's at the bottom, you might say, the basement of the first state. So there's a progression, first state and then second state. When we go past from the first state to the second state, we wake up in a physical, psychological sense. And now we realize we're in our house, we have work to do or family or whatever. these are the two states in which most people spend most of their time oblivious to the fact that more is possible. There's something more. Higher states are possible. And you can think of this like like an ocean. The second state is like an ocean. And the first state is akin to the earth, the physical earth below the ocean. And where we want to be, and what this system teaches is, first we have to get to the surface of the ocean, to the top of this second state, and realize that we're actually in the ocean. Because most of the time we don't realize that. The third state would be akin to the sky. Consciousness is now in a different, you could call it a dimension of awareness, a state of awareness, a higher degree of consciousness. And in this state, you vividly see that you're here. You recognize that you're here. Like right now, if you stop listening to what I'm saying and just really become aware of yourself in the room, and this is what Mihai was doing in the initial sort of meditation, trying to hold to this recognition, this realization, I'm here. I'm right here, right now, without words, listening, seeing, recognizing what's going on in the body, all of that. That is, now we're on the surface of this ocean of the second state, and we're starting to look into the sky, you might say, of our being, of our consciousness. And then there's another state, a fourth state, which would be akin to, imagine flying in an airplane and all the way in the sky, going all the way up to the upper atmosphere, and eventually arriving in space. Now you have eclipsed the entire atmosphere, the entire ocean, the entire earth. You're in a universal arena, you might say, to use another three-dimensional analogy. Now you're in space. You are space. Consciousness is space. This is all just by way of analogy to try to explain to the mind, really, there are these degrees, and to try to give us some reference for when we become aware, to see where am I? Where was I? I was 30 feet below the surface of my consciousness. I was immersed in a problem. I was lost in a task I have to do at work. I was preoccupied with a person who I had difficulty with. Or I was 100 feet below the surface. I was experiencing I had some kind of deep rage or anger, and I was in deep imagination about how I was going to attack this person or seek revenge or tell them off or whatever. Or I'm hating on myself. I'm now 100 feet below the surface of the ocean. And then floating to the surface, or suddenly arriving at the surface and going, whew, what was all that? That I didn't need to be there. That was unconscious living, you might say, deep below the surface. Instead of popping up and realizing I'm just here in my room, nothing is disturbing me. And just being here right now. It's easier to talk about this third state relative to the second state than it is to talk about the fourth state. And we don't even really need to talk about the fourth state too much, because just as when you have to pass from the second state out of it to get to the third state, so consciousness has to pass through the third state to, let's say, cross the threshold into the fourth state, a higher state. But in the beginning, that's imagination, really, what this fourth state is. I will say this, one of the values of the fourth way, breaking these states down like this, helps us be less in imagination. When you go to some non-dual teachings, this isn't a criticism of them, but it is a reality in my experience. There's this idea, you're trying to get to this fourth state, the state of bliss, nirvana, pure enlightenment, universal consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Just go there and try to be that. And that's valid. However, what the fourth way teaches is you can't just jump. You can't just skip to that. You can't pass completely through the third state and just boom, nirvana. So we want to know first that we're here, that we're conscious. And this is the central pivot of the fourth way system that everything else, all the other ideas revolve around. When we lose sight of this, that we're right here and recognizing we're right here, the rest just becomes mental machinations about an idea, about a system, about awakening. It has to be tethered, tied, anchored to remembering to be here right now. And a lot of what we're going to be going over these next many weeks is what keeps us in this second state? Why are we in this state all the time? Why can't we be in the third state? Why can't consciousness be more free, be more awake, be more conscious? What keeps us down? And why do we also like to be kept down? It's ironic to say that, but something in us wants, likes, even prefers to be asleep. And so we'll be introducing that, talking about that, and trying to give you practical ways of observing it in yourselves, as we've learned over the many years. Some very good methods, some very good techniques for that. I can say more, and we will say more, but before I pass it back to you, Mihai, I would just reiterate this idea. Right now, just realize where you are and use this as your measuring stick. Realize you forget about this. We forget to remember that we're here. It's so simple in a way, and yet it's very profound. So as you're here today and you're listening, at a certain point, and hopefully many points, you will suddenly realize, wow, I was listening, but I forgot that I was in the room, sitting on the couch, listening. That awareness, that consciousness is what we are all interested. I think that's why you're all here. That's why I'm here today. This is what we're so interested in. This is the big fish that Christ talked about in the Bible, the esoteric meaning, the big fish. Throw away all the little. This is the big fish, being here, being conscious.